Picture this. Your hands are in bread dough, floury, warm, a little sticky. Or you're outside and the only sound is your footsteps and maybe some birds. Or you're sitting with a knitting project and you just finished a row and something in your chest is slightly quieter than it was an hour ago. If any of that sounds familiar, or if it sounds like something you desperately want but can't seem to make time for, this episode is for you. There's even a term for this now, and it's called Nonnamaxing, derived from the Italian word for grandmother, and it's one of the most searched wellness trends of 2026. The idea is simple. Live a little more like your favorite grandma. Cook from scratch. Take daily walks. Put down that phone. Prioritize tactile, simple pleasures. And what started as a lifestyle aesthetic on social media has turned out to have some genuinely compelling neuroscience behind it. Your grandmother's pace of life may be exactly what your nervous system needs. Today, we're going to unpack why. Slow living is not new. It actually traces back to the slow food movement in Italy in the 1980s. That was a grassroots protest against fast food chains and the erosion of culinary culture. But in 2026, it's gone fully mainstream, driven by burnout, digital fatigue, and what I think as a post-pandemic reckoning with what actually matters. The numbers are striking. Searches for outdoor analog hobbies like knitting, crochet, embroidery, painting, that's up 136% in just the past 6 months. That's according to Michael's 2026 Crafting Trends report. Yarn accessory sales have grown 40% every year, and craft night searches are also up. So this is not a niche. This is a true movement that we're witnessing. People are voting with their time for something different. What I find clinically compelling about this movement is that it's not a top-down wellness prescription. No one's telling people to pick up knitting for their mental health. They're arriving here on their own intuitively because something is working. I've had patients describe getting back to baking or starting a garden or committing to a weekly long walk without their phone. And what they report consistently is feeling calmer, present, and more like themselves. Some of you know that my second passion in life is music and performance. And I can say that in the last few months for myself, even making more time for playing music, picking up instruments that I haven't played in a while, writing music again and performing, that's really helped to recharge me and get me in touch with a part of me that really needs that level of creativity and an outlet outside of my professional persona. So we see this everywhere. This is not just among my patients. I gave you examples about how this affects me, and I hear it from my family and my friends as well. And it's really cool to see that the research is actually backing this trend up. To understand why slow living works so well, it helps to understand what it's working against. A big proportion of millennials report feeling burnt out almost every day. Burnout isn't just being tired. It has measurable physiological consequences like elevated cortisol, suppressed immune function, disrupted sleep, and a real type of cognitive impairment. This is not talking about brain damage. This is talking about this idea of them not being able to focus and not being able to remember things, but it's not really backed up by a neurological reason. So when people are stressed to the max, it can be really hard for them to focus and to concentrate and to activate their executive function. That's the part of our brains that we use for higher order thinking, like planning ahead and doing multiple things in quick succession. And you can't do those types of things well if you are burnt out and you don't have any cognitive resources. So this is truly something that we're seeing that urgency culture is actively producing. It's actually making us less productive at the things that we need to do. And also we tend to enjoy it a lot less as well. Urgency culture is this constant pressure of always needing to be connected. The notifications you get on your phone, the emails, the sense that you should always be reachable, always be doing something, always optimizing something. The brain is not designed for this type of sustained high alert. Our brains are taught to kind of go back and forth between these levels of high alert and then time where you can be in the rest and digestion phase. This is where your body actually has time to relax, to rebuild, to heal, and your brain has room for creativity and interesting musings and think about things that might be outside of just the tasks of every day. Our brain naturally needs rhythms and stimulation and recovery. Both of those things need to happen. And that's why we get so much from even sleeping. That really helps us to recover. What screens do and what slow living undoes is maintaining the nervous system in a low-grade state of arousal. Social media activates social threat circuitry. News cycles continue to hit the amygdala. That's our brain center for emotional processing. So when we have access to tactile analog engagement, this does the opposite. It downregulates the stress response in a way that are now measurable in a lab. The concept at the center of why slow living works is flow. That's a term coined by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is a state of complete absorption in a task that is just challenging enough to require your full attention, but not so difficult that it tips into anxiety. You've probably experienced this without having a word for it. Time seems to pass differently during these activities, and your self-conscious just drops away, and you emerge from whatever you were doing feeling genuinely refreshed rather than depleted. Slow, repetitive tactile activities are exceptionally reliable flow triggers. So some examples are knitting, baking, embroidery, gardening. For some people, they'll say playing music, running, anything that requires enough attention to occupy the mind and the body, but not so much that they become stressful. Psychologists describe this as the zone of predictability. It's enough structure to feel safe and enough engagement to feel alive. During flow, the brain's default mode network, that's the system responsible for rumination and self-referential thinking, the part that replays arguments and catastrophizes about the future, that part of your brain quiets down significantly. So this is a genuine regulation point. A large international survey of knitters found that people who knit more than 3 times a week reported benefits to mood, cognitive function, and a sense of calm that were comparable to structured mindfulness programs. Think about that. So whether you are a knitter or not, you've probably felt some version of this doing some activity. Maybe it's cooking a delicious meal, tending to your garden, putting together a puzzle. Any of these activities could actually produce many of these similar wellness effects. So if you can't quite pin down when you last felt it, just stay with me because I'm going to show you how to find this in the tools section. Tactile engagement activates sensory regulation pathways that screen use simply can't replicate. Touch, texture, rhythm, and smell, they all communicate safety to your nervous system through pathways that have been active in human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. So working with your hands is not a throwback, it's actually a return to your true biological baseline. A study a few years back, and this really surprised me when I first read it, found that just 20 minutes of art making significantly reduced cortisol levels in participants, regardless of their artistic experience or skill level. Just 20 minutes. So the reduction wasn't about being good at art, it was just about actually doing it. And separately, there was another study at Harvard that identified that repetitive physical tasks can trigger what is called the relaxation response. That's the physiological opposite of the stress response. So what happens? You see slower heart rate, lower blood pressure, decreased cortisol. This is what knitting, baking bread, pulling weeds, walking a familiar trail, all of these are actually helping to do this to your body, whether you know it or not. Then there's the dopamine piece. Completing a tangible object, like a row of stitches you can feel or a garden bed you can see, that triggers the brain's reward circuitry in a qualitatively different way than completing a digital task. That's because you can hold it, and that concrete evidence of your own capability matters, especially when burnout has quietly eroded the sense that you can make things happen. In my clinical work, I see this come up a lot. People who feel effective in their analog lives often cope better with the parts of their digital lives that they can't have as much control of. I want to make one more point before we get to the tools because this is really important. Slow living is not just a wellness practice. It's a counter-cultural act in a world organized around productivity, urgency, and constant stimulation. Choosing to do something with no measurable output is a psychological statement as much as a personal one. Even our friends across the pond have found evidence for this. A 2024 study of more than 7,000 UK adults found that engaging in creative activities was associated with greater happiness and life satisfaction. And here's the part that's really crucial. The impact of crafting on participants' sense that life is worthwhile was more significant than the impact of their employment status. So in this case, what you make with your hands may matter more to your sense of a meaningful life, a life well lived, than perhaps what you do for work. So that's a very interesting finding, especially for people who maybe are very identified with their work and their career and their productive identity. Let me know how that lands with you and definitely share with us what you think. So, as I've been saying, this is not about opting out of modern life completely. It's just about building a genuine recovery plan, the way that elite athletes really make sure that they prioritize training and rest. You can't sustain your high output without deliberate recovery. The brain and the body really need this, and slow living is a recovery period that most of us have stopped paying attention to. So let's get to the 3 practical tools of the day. Your nervous system already knows what it needs, and I want you to have some tangible ways to start. The first tool is to find your flow activity. This is one of my favorite tools because I love talking to people about psychological flow. As I mentioned earlier, music is one of my most cherished activities to achieve psychological flow. Flow requires a task that is just challenging enough, not so simple that it's boring, but not so difficult that it tips into stress. That sweet spot is different for every person, which is why I resist prescribing a specific activity. What I do instead is ask a question I find very useful with my burnt out clients. What did you do before life got this busy that didn't feel like work? Just that simple question. So before you were trying to optimize everything, before every activity had to justify itself with outcomes, what did you just do because it felt good to you? That's almost always a great starting point. If nothing comes to mind, here are some example activities across different sensory profiles. For tactile people, knitting, crocheting, bread baking, pottery, woodworking, gardening. For movement-oriented people, hiking, running, swimming, cooking a meal that takes real time. For visual people, drawing, painting, jigsaw puzzles, botanical illustrations. So it's just important to note that not any one activity is better than another. What matters is that it's analog and not digital. It also matters that it's absorbing enough to hold your attention without straining it. So start small, 20 minutes 3 times a week should do it. And this dose response research on knitting, for example, starts showing benefits at exactly this threshold. So you don't need to rebuild your entire life. You just need a consistent pocket of time that you're setting aside that belongs to slow living. The second tool is to make it phone free. So this is the undivided attention piece. And I know this might be the part you might not like, but I promise it really makes a difference. You got to do this without your phone. So no scrolling, no podcast playing in the background, even my podcast, and no TV on in the corner. I know that sounds very countercultural these days, but listen, it's really important that it's an 100% analog activity that you can devote your attention to for the time that you're doing it. The reason why this matters is because the single factor that most undermines the benefits of slow activities is divided attention. Knitting while watching TV gives you some benefit, but knitting with your full attention, with your phone in another room, nothing competing for your awareness, that gives you significantly more. If it makes you anxious to be away from your devices, just set an analog alarm clock for 20 minutes so you know that when that alarm clock goes off, you can get back to your other activities. But it is really important that you set aside undivided attention for the activity that you choose. Remember, the flow state cannot fully form when part of your brain is monitoring something like a notification, some noise in the background that doesn't belong to the actual activity. So the practical rule is this: whatever your slow activity is, give it that 20 uninterrupted minutes. That's where the cortisol reduction actually happens. And that's where your default mode network quiets. And here's something honest. The discomfort you will probably feel in the first few minutes of being fully present with a single task is itself very useful information about how overstimulated your nervous system has become. But that discomfort is not a reason to stop. It's actually a reason to keep going and keep working on this undivided attention skill. It really gets easier with practice and very quickly. And by the way, it feels so much better too. The third tool is build-in community, and this is the amplifier effect. The research on slow activities show a meaningful amplifier effect when they're done with other people. Knitting circles, running or biking with a group, baking with friends or family members, community garden plots, group hiking. The combination of tactile regulation and social co-regulation produces benefits that exceed either alone. The nervous system really responds to the presence of another person. We are social beings after all, and we're meant to co-regulate with one another. So this is a very powerful combination. People are already intuiting this. Girls' Night craft searches are up 242% year over year. That's amazing. The social dimension of these activities is not just an accident. It's really part of the prescription, part of the medicine. So here's your practical move for this week. Identify one slow activity you already do or want to try, and find at least one other person to do it with. The barrier to starting is lower than it sounds. And remember, the research consistently shows that the payoff is really huge. And the takeaway I want to leave you with is that slow living is not a luxury. It's not laziness, and it's not a rejection of your ambition. It's a neurologically grounded practice that your brain requires in order to sustain the pace of everything else you're asking it to do. Try this out and let me know how it goes. Comment on our YouTube channel or email our team at psychologist@quickanddirtytips.com. That's a wrap on today's Savvy Psychologist. Your grandmother probably didn't call it a nervous system regulation practice. She just called it living. Turns out she was onto something big, something that neuroscience is only now catching up to. You don't have to bake bread or pick up needles. You just have to find your version of slow living and protect it. And remember, insight without action is just interesting. So take one thing from today and do something with it. Savvy Psychologist is a quick and dirty tips podcast. Thanks to the QDT Macmillan team. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, share this episode with a friend, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I'll meet you back here next episode. Before I let you go, a quick but important note. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not a substitute for working with a licensed mental health professional, and nothing here constitutes clinical advice or establishes a therapeutic relationship. If you're struggling, please reach out to someone who can truly support you.